Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're going weiter in our weekly shirim on the Ramchal's Adir BaMarom commentary on the Idra Rabbah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we're continuing to go down the path of properly understanding the Malachi Edom, the Edomite kings, which represents this cataclysmic stage of creation and formation, which is a traumatic collapse. It's things breaking down. It's an imbalance between the lights and the vessels. And for whatever reason, things fall apart. The center doesn't seem to be able to hold. And what appears to be chaos and anarchy is unleashed upon reality. That is what happens if we look at the narrative of the shattering of the vessels, of Shvirat HaKelim, of the death of the Edomite kings, as this trauma that sets history into motion. But one of the things that the Arizal came to teach us most significantly, and one of the things that all of the commentators of the Arizal come to reveal to us is that in truth, this cataclysmic trauma, this shattering that takes place at the outset of creation, this infantile expression of intensification and the force of severity that's rooted in Bina, that blood-like nature of Edom and all of the undeveloped expressive forces that get unleashed upon reality at first glance, instead of looking at that as an accidental breakdown that then leads to the need to recuperate. What Panemius HaTorah is teaching us is to see that this was the fundamentally necessary way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to create the world. That the Shvira is not a traumatic breakdown to a previous stage, but rather the Shvira is the constitutive trauma, so to say, the breakdown that sets the entire system into motion. That what we're going to see is that ultimately the entire process of Panemius HaTorah is learning how to draw tikkun out of tohu, how to find order and rectification from within chaos. But unlike the commonly held belief, which is that there was a stage of chaos that ended, and then there's a stage of rectification that takes place after the ending of chaos, what Panemius HaTorah teaches us is that chaos gives birth to rectification, and that rectification is nothing other than the reorientation that we have towards the original chaos. So all of these forces, all of these gvuros, all of these dinim, all of the breakdown, all of the concealment, all of this cataclysm, all of the structural breakage that seems to set history into this chaotic unfolding process where we now need to go down into the nether territories and clarify broken things that should never have been broken in the hopes of maybe, just maybe, composing a new system of secondary order. We have to look at it in a very different way. Adrabah, Ibcha Mistabra, it starts with the Shvira. The Shvira is the opening expression. It is the pure potentiation of expression in its chaotic form prior to organization, but it's not separate than organization. It is the very fabric through which organization is going to be developed. It is like the initial points of chaotic energy that, due to their intensification, had not yet fit within an ordered and systematic process. The order of tikkun, of rectification, of contraction for the sake of revelation, of maintaining order for the sake of a particularized form of expression, this is the very nature of the emergence of tikkun. It comes from within chaos itself. It's not opposite to chaos. It is the harnessing of chaos. And so the trauma, the tohu, the shvira, the misas hamalachim, instead of looking at it as this negative, symptom-inducing breakdown at the outset of reality, we have to begin to understand how to look at it differently as the process of tshuva, that the descent and the breakdown and that chaotic revelation is simply the first instantiation of Bria, and then it's going to be left to our own devices, to our own bechira to rectify. And so much of the Zohar Kadosh and the Idrab especially is coming to reorient us towards this breakdown. This descent into chaos is ultimately not something that is negative or contradictory or blocking the tachlis of reality, but rather it's the very thing that sets the possibility of finding the tachlis of reality into process. So the words of the Idrab are as follows, continuing to explain the cause of the breakdown, the cause of the Shvira, the cause of the death of these original kings. So the Zohar Kadosh, after explaining that the Parisu was not Nifras, there was no partition separating above and below, so there was an inundation of all things. So the Zohar continues and it says, V'tikunai lo itkaimu hadahu dechtiv ve'ela hamalachim asher malchu be'eretz Edom lifnei melech lebnei Yisrael malka kadma'a lebnei Yisrael kadma'a. So one of the reasons for the breakdown of the Edomite kings, which are hinted to in the pasuk, and these are the kings that ruled in Edom prior to the rulership of Bnei Yisrael, which represents the first instantiation of organization that comes to tether together all of the chaotic forces of Edom. So the language that we see is v'tikunai lo itkaimu. The tikkunim, the rectifications, were not sustained; they were insustainable. What is a tikkun? What is a rectification? So when we look at the Arizal based on the Zohar Kadosh, the tikkunim are going to be the hairs, they're going to be the namen, they're going to be the white spaces between each hair, they're going to be the Yud Gimel Tikkune Dikna, the pipelines of the beard, they're going to be the Zayin Tikkunim of the Reish of Zer Anpin, they're going to be the Zayin Tikkunim of Atik Yoimin, that's Mislabish and Arich Anpin. What is the singular principle that holds all of these concepts of tikkun together? Tikkun is concealment for the sake of revelation. Tikkun is the application of vessels that can hold, maintain, and process the light that is measured into it without falling apart and without withholding that light from the level below. The light above needs to be processed by the level below, but the inundation of the light from above is too much, and therefore it overwhelms the level of the receptivity below, and the vessels shatter. The tikkunim are the sheaths of concealment, or levushim, or the process of engarbment that allows the upper level to express itself downwards into the lower level. The lower level absorbs it, it measures it, it holds it, and it becomes a lens through which that higher level is going to be revealed. That is always what a tikkun means. It's a diminution for the sake of an expansion. It's a contraction for the sake of revelation, a concealment for the sake of revelation. Ha-he'elem, hu hagiloi, the he'elem, the containment, the concealment of the lights, which is the process of applying vessels and kalim and gvul and midos, is in and of itself the revelation. That is the notion of a tikkun. Unlike the light in the time of chaos, where all it was inundation of light without any restriction whatsoever, the time of tikkun is a time of the rectification of that imbalance and the balancing act of the tikkunim. Zakt the Heilige Ramchal. V'hine Amar Malcha Kadma L'Bnei Yisrael Kadma. After the death of the Edomite kings was going to be the emergence of the organized principle of Nishmas Yisrael. And so we see that it is an outgrowth of the chaos rather than something that stands separate and apart to the chaos. The kingship of Bnei Yisrael is in and of itself the Malchei Edom, except it gets named in a different name. Upirush ha'inyan, the explanation of the matter is as follows: Kikan haya hazer anpin harishon hanimtza b'metzios b'mekomo ha'ikari harishon. What we're encountering in Shvirat HaKelim is where the partzuf of Zer Anpin emerges for the first time in its fullness without the upper qualities of the Gimel Rishon, without its Chachma Bina and Das, without its Yud Kei, but first and foremost it is being revealed here, and this is the first full instantiation of Zer Anpin on the screen of history and existence. What takes shape and what emerges at the moment of the world of Tohu, at the moment of Shviras HaKelim, is the first emergence of the partzuf of Zer Anpin. The reason the partzuf of Zer Anpin is so significant, and the reason that it has to undergo this crisis, so to say, unlike the upper spheros, which don't go through this process, is because Zer Anpin and Malchus is going to be the main place in which we express our volitional quality of Bechira, where we are the ones who are able to take responsibility, at least externally, for our religious work, where we feel that it is our responsibility to clarify, or God forbid, to do the opposite. The territory of Zer Anpin is Nishmas Yisrael Banim Atem LaHashem Elokeichem. The entire purpose of the Tzimtzum was so that this level of human consciousness, on the level of Nishmas Yisrael, can take shape, so it can operate within the field of apparent human volitionality, where we are the ones who are going to be driving the process of history along towards the end. That is the Tachlis. The Tachlis is to reveal the parts of Zer Anpin. And what we're encountering here in the Shvira is that it's the first expression of Zer Anpin. This is the first impact, the first encounter that the child has, so to say, with reality. Zer Anpin, which is us, has its exposure into reality, and it is this process of the shattering, this disembodied form, this dissolution of shape is the first expression of Zer Anpin onto the scene. And like anything else, the first time something is revealed, it represents the root form of that. Umasha na'aseh bazeh hazah, and what is happening to Zer Anpin at this level, yeh achar kach b'chol ha'olam moshatachaseh. The formation principle that is taking place here at Shviras HaKelim is not simply something that relates to Zer Anpin in its breakage, but rather it sets in motion the entire organization principle that is going to be expressed at every level of the unfolding process of existence. That which is taking shape in the beginning is going to express itself downwards on every subsequent level. ונמצא שעד שלא יצא מעולם בחינוך התיקון זה של מלך לבני ישראל, היה עניין השבירה, כי כך הוצרך שיהיה כדי להעמיד כל הדברים בגבול הצורך. And so the Ramchal says to remember what we're talking about when we talk about Shvira, that the emergence of Zer Anpin in its broken, deficient state, which was without its organizational principle, is the very framework in which all of the subsequent unfoldings are going to have to take shape. And prior to the emergence of Tikkun, which is the Melech L'Bnei Yisrael, was the unfolding process of the Shvira itself, this shattering, which is not an accidental expression, but rather the fundamental way in which Zer Anpin expresses itself first and foremost, that the breakage is the way it expresses itself in the beginning. And this is how it had to be, says the Ramchal. Ki kach hutzrach she'yeh. Why does it have to be this way? Kedei laha'amid kol hadvarim begvul hatzarich. So that each and everything can stand in accordance with its own particularized limitation and measure. Therein lies the secret of what the process of Olam Tohu was, to maintain the balancing act between lights and vessels, so that each and everything can be revealed without overwhelming the space, and that each and everything can be there in a formalized way without destroying the system. That's the purpose. This is the slow and steady revelation of Zer Anpin, which first and foremost has to emerge through this principle of disorientation and disconnection, and then merge itself into expressed connectivity. Zakta Heilige Ramchal. And now we're going to explain exactly what was taking place in this initial stage of that initial immature infantile expression of Zer Anpin, which nevertheless, in spite of its infantile nature, is nevertheless going to be the bedrock upon which all other gradations of Zer Anpin are going to take shape. Let's understand exactly where the Shira took place, and ultimately, more significantly, let's try and understand the outgrowth, or that which is going to emerge from within the Shira. What purpose is going to be revealed? All of this is simply so that we can properly understand these words that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Schusio Ganalinu put into the Zohar HaKadosh. Kvar shamata tam hashvira mahu. We already explained, says the Ramchal, the reason, so to say, behind the unfolding process of Shviras HaKelim. The Leshem Shbo V'Chaloma, who also spent so much time in Sefer Hadeya discussing Olam HaTohu, and how it's not the end of a previous system, but rather the outpoint, the point of initiation where the entire system unfolds. There, the Leshem gives 11 reasons that are culled from within the writings of the Arizal as to the purpose of the Shviras HaKelim. But ultimately, as the Meforshim point out, all of those various reasons can be composed and centered around singular principles. And that's what the Ramchal is being masbir here. The reason for the Shvira is what? The reason for the Shvira, dahainu kedei latet hachana l'chol hadvarim she'amarnu lamala shehem b'metzias ha'adam ba'olam hazeh. All of the things, all of the fields of experience, all of the territories of Bechira between good, bad, and operating in that middle center wherein we are the ones who are machriya, the nature of reality, all of that is going to unfold later on in the expression of human beings in this world. It's all rooted up in the initial stirrings of Shviras HaKelim. The entire purpose of this perfectly imperfect expression that seems to break is so that the human being can cultivate themselves and develop into a Baal Bechira. The klalas hakol, the general framework of what it is that we want to reveal, is that shehiyeh churban v'tikun. The way in which human beings need to be revealed is going to be in a reality that is not simply saturated with rectification, because at that point there would be no need for human involvement, nor is it a system that is totally rooted in destruction, because there would also be no room for the human being, but rather it's going to be the slow and steady process of the emergence of rectification from within the breakdown itself. The same process that we uncover on every level of exile for the sake of redemption, smallness for the sake of greatness, concealment for the sake of revelation. So too the unfolding principles at the heart of the Shvira is going to be this binary process, which is going to be revealed to be two stages within the singular impulse of experience, is going to be churban v'tikun, breaking and building. Umin hachurban teitzei hasitra achra, ubetikun oy tichne oy ta'avor legamre. And representative in these two stages is also going to be the emergence of the concealing sheath that blocks the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout the history of reality, which is what we refer to as the Sitra Achra, and the eventual undoing, submission of that Sitra Achra, or the full destruction of it. So just as reality and existence on an ontological level undergoes revelation through the stage of breakdown for the sake of building, destruction for the sake of construction, one of the main purposes for that initial stage of the destruction is so that the quality of the Sitra Achra can be revealed. The Sitra Achra is the notion that there is something other than godliness. And once that notion is set into reality, it can express itself at each and every point along the number line, which is when it descends down from concealment into severity, into judgments, into external shells, into chataim, and all of the variations of concealment. But first and foremost, what Hashem wanted to reveal, and this is what set the entire process of the Shvira in motion, was for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reveal this potentiation of limitation that existed in an infinite way within the light of the infinite, so that it can reveal itself in existence as a concealing element, something that blocks out the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the nature of the Sitra Achra. And the purpose of that being expressed is so that we can then engage in the work of the Tikkun, which is the secret of either nullifying it completely or subduing it. And so there's the good and the bad, the emergence of unity, disunity, and unity. Ki be'emes im hatikun hayashalem, v'chein kishiyeh shalem la'ased lavo, lo tia od sitra achra. Because in truth, the reality of the Sitra Achra, the reality of otherness, the reality of something other than godliness, the reality of the selfhood, the reality of all of the constrictive elements that are symptomatic and emergent from this quality of God's concealment, in truth, prior to the descent into history and after the end of history, there's not going to be any revelation of the Sitra Achra. The Sitra Achra, concealment, is not a standalone element, God forbid, but rather it is a fundamental part of the unfolding process so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire from reality could be expressed. It is not something that is pre-existent, God forbid, like the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's a secondary revelation and a tool that enables reality to unfold in accordance with the goal that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from it. So at the end of the Tikkun, when things are fundamentally rectified, the Sitra Achra is not going to have a place anymore. V'hine be'inyan zeh ya'alu v'yardu ha'ilamos al yedei ma'isei ha'adam, ki im yizke yagia el sof ha'tikun, u'kefi zechuso ken yitkariv el ha'sof hazeh. And the entire purpose for the unfolding quality of the Sitra Achra unto the scene of history is so that the human being can take on responsibility, and in accordance with their work, their own individualized work of clarifications and descending down into the thickness to reveal the light, so too are we going to merit the light that emerges afterwards. It is specifically within the territory of the Sitra Achra that we are going to be able to ascend and descend throughout all of the worlds by way of the work of the individual. And if we do it properly, we'll come to the end of the Tikkun, and we are the ones who are going to have the schus of having brought about the Tikkun closer and closer. The entire edifice of the Ramchal system is built upon the principle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants Bnei Yisrael to be nehene, to find pleasure and benefit from the perpetual process of the unfolding unity. And the only way for us to benefit from the perpetually unfolding unity is for us to feel that it is our own efforts and our own clarifications and our own descent into constriction and the ascent out of it by way of clarity that is going to bring about this tikkun, so that we won't be ashamed to look at HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the face when he gives us the goodness, because now we'll feel that we played a certain role in it, that we had some bechira. Ve'im lo yizkeh, hine yagvir yoter koyach hakilkul hanimshach min hachurban harishon, sha'adayim lo nishlan hitaken. But if within the thread of history we do not take the opportunity of bechira to rectify and to bring the line of history closer to its proper end, and we allow the potential of destruction, which is rooted in the Sitra Achra, to continue and grow forward unchecked from within that first churban, so then the world is going to continue to operate in a place of unfixedness. V'nimsa shakoil aliyas ha'ilamus utoldos hatikun v'chol nefilosam toldos hachurban. So it turns out that throughout the unfolding process of individualized history in the day-to-day, in the week-to-week, in the month-to-month, in the year-to-year, ultimately all of the ups and downs are still byproducts of that initial shvira and the process of tikkun. Every descent down is an offspring of the shvira, and every ascent upwards is going to be an expression of the tikkun. Yihya bechlal o yihya beprat derech echad lekol v'havein hetiv. Whether we're talking about the individual's experience or whether talking about the collective experience, bein kach ubein kach, however we look at it, life, existence, reality is an expression of this dual impulse at the heart of a singularity, which is churban and tikkun, he'elem v'giloi, tohu, and rectification. All ascent and descent are rooted in these two fundamental ontological bedrocks of every moment in existence. ותבין גם כן שכאשר יהיה נשלם פעם אחד התיקון שלמס גמור, לא יהיה עוד קלקול. And we have to also understand, when we understand this, is that if theoretically we were able to rectify everything immediately, and all of the birurim were nisbarer, it's not that there would be a continued presence of concealment, but rather illumination would be there. Now we have to understand that it doesn't mean we would have reached the apex of the level. It's just that the concealment would not be rooted in something other than godliness, but it would be the revelation of endless growth by way of goodness without the need to descend down and then reascend in the hopes of coming back to the place of light. It's tzadikim ein lehem menucha ba'olam hazeh ve'ein lehem menucha ba'olam haba ki holchem mechayil el chayil. It's the perpetual ascendancy of the work of the tzaddik, which is growth from within a good enough space, where I'm not growing by way of the urgency, but I'm growing by the recognition of the fact that od yoter tov, and there's infinite levels of growth. But the notion of the shvira and those post-traumatic vibes, so to say, that growth has to come about by way of concealment, that is not something that is locked into reality forever. Aval kol zman heyos od eza chelak min hakilkul shaloi nastalik. But as long as there's a certain pocket of energy, a certain element of reality that has not been rectified, that has still not been purified from its concealment, and is still caught up within that anger and chaos of Edom, hadvarim oimdim lehiskari. There's always more room for us to bring about more and more goodness. O el hatikun ala asid, o el kilkul ha'avar lefi ha'maasim. As long as the shvira has not been metukan, and we know that the shvira has not been metukan because Mashiach Tzidkenu is not here yet. The asara nitzotzos that rest at the bottom of Eilam Ha'asiyah are the final birurim that have to take shape. That's the place that Amalek has an achiza on. That's referred to as She'ir Des Yaakov. Those are the lowest neshamos. That's our generation, where it's so difficult to think about anything or do anything. But ultimately, it's there within those final birurim that the legs of Adam Kadmon Kavyachol are going to be Neskala and Harazesim, and all of the final birurim of this worldliness and the Asiyah Shaba Asiyah is going to be Nisparer, and Lepeta Petom HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to reveal himself. But until then, it's up to us. Every good deed is moving history closer to its end, and every negative deed is seemingly concealing the purposeful end of history itself. It's all in accordance with our maisim, which is the purpose of the shvira. Gam ka'asher nischadshu inyanim gedolim ba'olam shagarmu tagburus tikuno kilkul hine acher ha'inyanim ha'ilu yigmiru ha'maisim. And so too, and the Leshem has a tremendous arichas in this as well. All of the big revelations that help society along the rungs, the industrial revolutions, the modernization, and the technological advancements that are not destructive, all of those things are rooted in moments that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided for there to be a new birur. And all of the destructive things that emerge into reality are all rooted in the prehistoric bedrock of the Shvira, which is moments of concealment, that historical progress, both on the individual level as well as on the unconscious level and the grand historic process, are all rooted in the ebb and flow, the up and down, the opening and the closing of the Shvira and the Tikkun. It's all rooted in either adding to the light or concealing the light. Umizen nimshach shinoi hazmanim liyisrael b'havin hetev. And in accordance with those lofty lights that Hashem is either revealing or those lower lights that Hashem is concealing, is going to be the nature of Klal Yisrael's experience within history itself. Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to continue next week with going in further and further into the Shira to understand exactly what happened. What was the stirring of the Shvira? How did the Shvira take place? The first thing that happened in the Shvira is that when Zer Anpin emerged, it didn't emerge with all of its 10 Sviros in a revealed way. Every parts of everything in Metzios is a fractal of 10 Sviros, a Keser, a Chachma, a Bina, and a Zayin Tachtonim, which is a Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, and a Netzach, Hod, and Yisod. At first glance, when the parts of Zer Anpin emerged in reality, the upper 3 Sviros of Keser, Chachma, and Bina, those organizational principles of the divine light that holds the whole system together, were concealed. They were latent within Zer Anpin, but not yet revealed, and therefore it appeared as if it was only a Zayin Tachtonim. Something deficient emerged, and it was deficient of its upper 3 Sviros. And that is the setting of the stage for Shira. All of existence is encountering all of these things, the Zer Anpin that appears to be deficient, and it's our job to be mashlim it, to draw down more moichin to it, to reveal how this thing which appears to be broken is in truth, by definition, something that is always already whole, and it's going to be the job of Nishmas Yisrael to reveal that Be'ezras Hashem.